I remember the exact moment I stopped being my son's hero. He was 7 years old, sitting at the kitchen table with his crayons spread out in front of him, and he looked up at me with those brown eyes that used to light up whenever I walked into a room. But this time, they were different. There was something cold in them, something that looked like confusion mixed with accusation. He asked me why I didn't love him enough to stay. I almost dropped the grocery bags I was carrying. I set them down slowly, trying to keep my hands from shaking, and knelt beside his chair. I told him that I loved him more than anything in the world, that leaving the house wasn't the same as leaving him, that I would always be his father no matter where I slept at night. He didn't believe me. He just stared at the table and said that Mommy told him I chose to leave, that I wanted a new family, that I didn't want to be his dad anymore. That was the first time I realized what my ex-wife was doing. But it wouldn't be the last. And by the time my son was old enough to find the truth on his own, I had already lost him for over a decade. My name is Daniel, and this is the story of how my ex-wife turned my son against me, how she used every tool in her arsenal to erase me from his life, and how the truth finally found its way back to him through a box of old court emails she thought she had hidden forever. Let me take you back to the beginning, because that's the only way any of this makes sense. The beginning of my marriage, the beginning of my son's life, and the beginning of the slow unraveling that would cost me everything I loved. I met Elena when I was 24 and working as a mechanic at my uncle's garage. She came in with a beat-up Honda that was making a noise like a dying animal, and I was the one who ended up working on it. I remember she was wearing a blue sundress that made her eyes look like the ocean, and she laughed at a joke I made about her car needing a priest more than it needed a mechanic. That laugh was like something out of a movie. I fell for her right there in that greasy garage, surrounded by tools and oil stains and the smell of gasoline. We dated for 2 years before I proposed. I didn't have much money back then. I was saving every penny to buy a house, working double shifts, picking up side jobs on the weekends. But Elena didn't seem to mind. She told me she loved my ambition, my work ethic, the way I never complained about grinding through the hard stuff. She said I was the most reliable man she'd ever met, and I thought that was the greatest compliment anyone could give me. Looking back, I should have paid more attention to what she actually valued. Not the reliability itself, but what it could provide for her. She wasn't in love with me. She was in love with the stability I represented, the safety net I was building, the future that I would fund while she enjoyed the rewards. Our son Jacob was born 3 years into our marriage. I remember holding him for the first time in that sterile hospital room, this tiny wrinkled creature with a tuft of dark hair and the most perfect little fingers I'd ever seen. I promised him right then that I would give him everything. Every opportunity one never had. Every door I had to claw my way through. I would make sure Jacob never had to struggle the way I did. And I kept that promise. For years, I kept it. I worked my way up from mechanic to shop foreman to eventually opening my own garage. It was small at first, just a single bay and a waiting room with 3 plastic chairs. But I built it with my own hands, painted the walls myself, laid the flooring on my knees until my back screamed in protest. I named it Jacob's after my son. I wanted him to see his name on that building every time we drove past it. I wanted him to know that everything I was building was for him. The business grew slowly but steadily. By the time Jacob was 8, I had 7 employees and enough work to keep them all busy. We moved out of the small starter house and into a bigger one with 4 bedrooms and a backyard big enough for a swing set. Elena had stopped working after Jacob was born, and I was fine with that. I wanted her to be able to stay home with him, to be present for all the little moments I was missing because I was at the shop. That was the deal we had. I provided. She nurtured. We were a team. Except somewhere along the way, she stopped being on my team and started building her own. The first cracks appeared around Jacob's 9th birthday. Elena started going out more often, dinner with friends, shopping trips that lasted all day, weekend getaways with a group of women from her yoga class. She said she needed time for herself, that being a stay-at-home mom was isolating and she needed to maintain her identity outside of being a wife and mother. I understood that. I wanted her to be happy. I never asked her where the money was coming from for all those trips and dinners and expensive clothes. I just kept working harder to make sure she had whatever she needed. I see now that I was enabling her. That I was so desperate to be a good provider, so terrified of failing my family the way my own father had failed me, that I let her take and take and take without ever asking what she was giving in return. The marriage counselors we saw later would call it codependency. I call it being blind. The affair happened when Jacob was 11. I didn't find out about it until later, after the divorce proceedings were already underway. But looking back, I can see the signs. The way she started hiding her phone. The late nights she claimed were yoga or book club. The sudden interest in fitness and fashion and all the things she'd never cared about before. The way she looked at me sometimes with this mixture of pity and contempt, like I was a loyal dog that she was tired of feeding. Her affair partner was a real estate developer named Marcus. Rich, successful, charming in that slick way that makes you want to shower after shaking his hand. He owned a construction company and had more money than God, or at least more money than a mechanic with a small garage and a mortgage. Elena met him through one of her yoga friends, whose husband was in real estate too. They started as just friends, or so she told me. But I know now that it was never just friends. Marcus was the upgrade she'd been waiting for. When I finally caught her, it was through a text message that popped up on her laptop while she was in the shower. She'd left it open on the kitchen counter, and the notification was right there, impossible to ignore. Miss you already. Can't wait for next weekend. M. I stood there in my own kitchen, in the house I'd paid for with my blood and sweat, and watched a single text message shatter everything I thought I knew about my marriage. I confronted her that night. I told myself I would stay calm, that I would listen to her explanation before I jumped to conclusions. But the moment I saw her face when I mentioned the text, I knew. The guilt was written all over her, the panic, the desperate scrambling to come up with a lie that might save her. She tried to tell me it was nothing, just a friend, just a work colleague. I asked her what kind of work colleague sends can't wait for next weekend texts, and she broke. The tears came, the excuses, the blame shifting. She told me I was never home, that I was always working, that I'd abandoned her emotionally years ago, that she was lonely and I was the one who had pushed her into someone else's arms. I sat there in my own living room, on the couch I'd bought with my first bonus check, and listened to my wife explain why it was my fault she was cheating on me. The gaslighting was something I wouldn't fully understand until years later, when I'd had enough therapy to recognize it for what it was. But in that moment, I absorbed every bit of blame she threw at me. I apologized. I promised to work less, to be more present, to fix whatever was broken. I told her I would do anything to save our family. And for a few months, I tried. I hired a manager to run the shop so I could be home more. I took Jacob to school and picked him up. I cooked dinner. I planned date nights. I bought flowers and wrote notes and did everything I could think of to remind her why she'd married me in the first place. It didn't matter. She'd already made up her mind. The divorce papers came 3 months later. She served me on a Tuesday morning, right after I'd dropped Jacob off at school. I walked back into the house to find her sitting at the kitchen table with an envelope and a lawyer's letterhead. She said it was over, that she'd given me a chance and I'd failed, that she was taking Jacob and moving in with Marcus. I remember the sound of my own blood pounding in my ears. I asked her if Marcus was the reason she'd given up on me, and she looked me dead in the eye and said, "Marcus has nothing to do with this. This is about you and me." We're not happy, Daniel. We haven't been happy in years. The whole time she was saying it, she was wearing a necklace he'd bought her. I'd noticed it weeks before but didn't say anything. Gold and diamonds. Way out of our budget. I should have known then. The divorce was brutal. Not because we had so many assets to fight over, but because Elena used every opportunity to paint me as the villain. She told her lawyer I was abusive, that I had a drinking problem, that I was never around and didn't care about Jacob. She got a restraining order against me, claiming I'd threatened her and Marcus. It was temporary, but it was enough to keep me away from the house and from Jacob while the custody hearing was pending. I fought it. God, I fought it. I hired the best lawyer I could afford, drained my savings, took out loans to pay for the legal battle. But I was a working-class mechanic going up against a woman who had aligned herself with a wealthy developer with connections. Marcus had money and lawyers and the kind of influence that made things happen. I had a garage and a mortgage and a desperate love for my son. The custody hearing was the worst day of my life, and I've had some bad ones. Elena testified that I was an absent father, that I chose work over my family, that I had a temper and had thrown things at her during arguments. She produced text messages I'd sent during a fight about a late bill, messages I'd written in frustration but had never once followed through on. She made me sound like a monster. I sat there in that courtroom, in my best suit, and watched my character being assassinated. My lawyer objected to most of it, but the judge had already formed an opinion. I could see it in her face, the way she looked at me like I was a danger to my own child. They awarded Elena primary custody. I got every other weekend and alternating holidays. The judge cited my intense work demands and history of emotional volatility as reasons for the ruling. I tried to explain that I'd already hired a manager, that I'd cut my hours, that I would be there for Jacob every single day if they let me. But it didn't matter. The case was closed. My son was being taken from me, and there was nothing I could do about it. The first few years after the divorce were a living nightmare. I saw Jacob on my weekends, but he was different. Distant. He didn't look at me the same way anymore. He didn't talk to me the way he used to, didn't share his secrets or tell me about his day at school. It was like I was a stranger he was obligated to visit, a distant relative he had no connection to. I tried everything. I took him to movies, to the zoo, to ball games. I bought him video games and bicycles and everything I thought a kid his age might want. I asked him about his classes, his friends, his interests. But he gave me nothing. Just short answers and uncomfortable silences and the occasional question about why I didn't live with him anymore. I told him the truth, or at least my version of it. I told him that Mommy and I had grown apart, that we'd decided it was better to live separately, that I loved him more than anything and that nothing would ever change that. But I could see that my words weren't matching up with what he was hearing at home. Because what he was hearing at home was that I'd abandoned him. That I'd chosen to leave. That I didn't love him enough to stay. That I had a new family now, a new life, and he was just a problem I had to deal with on weekends. Elena's strategy was brilliant in its cruelty. She didn't have to lie outright about most of it. She just presented the facts in a way that made me look like a monster. Yes, I had a new girlfriend eventually, though it was years after the divorce. Elena presented that as Daddy has a new family now. Yes, I worked long hours. Elena presented that as Daddy doesn't want to spend time with you. Yes, I had moved into a smaller apartment. Elena presented that as Daddy can't afford to take care of you. It was death by 1,000 cuts, and every single one of them was aimed at my relationship with my son. The alienation got worse as Jacob got older. By the time he was 13, he'd stopped calling me Dad. He just called me Daniel, like I was a neighbor or a distant uncle. He refused to hug me when we met for my weekends. He spent most of the time on his phone, texting his friends or scrolling through social media, barely acknowledging I existed. I remember one particular weekend when I'd taken him to the lake for fishing. I'd bought new rods, new bait, packed a cooler with his favorite snacks. I was trying so hard to create a memory, to break through the wall he'd built around himself. But he just sat on the bank with his phone in his hand, staring at the screen, not even pretending to fish. I sat down next to him and asked if he wanted to talk about anything. He looked at me with this flat, dead expression, like I was an obstacle he was trying to ignore. He told me he didn't want to be here, that he'd rather be at home with his friends, that I was just wasting his time. I asked him what he'd rather be doing, and he said, anything but this. I drove him back to his mother's house that night in silence. The drive took 45 minutes, and neither of us said a word. When we pulled up to the curb, he got out without looking back, without saying goodbye, and walked up to the front door where Elena was waiting for him with a smile. That was the night I started to give up. Not on loving him. I would never stop loving him. But on the idea that I could make him love me back. On the hope that the truth would somehow find its way to him. On the belief that good fathers always find a way to reach their children. I was 28 years old, and I felt like I'd already lost the only thing that mattered. Over the next several years, I built a life around the emptiness. I threw myself into the garage, expanding it into a full-scale auto repair and detailing business. I opened a second location, then a third. I bought the property next door and turned it into a custom shop for classic cars and restorations. I became the guy people called when they wanted something done right, when they wanted quality and reliability and someone who actually gave a damn about their customers. I told myself I was building something for Jacob's future. That even if he didn't want me in his life now, he'd eventually come around, and when he did, I'd have something to offer him. A legacy. A business he could step into. Something that would show him I'd never stop thinking about him. I also started to date again, cautiously at first, then more seriously. I met Amanda at a charity event for the local children's hospital. She was a physical therapist, kind and warm and totally unimpressed by my business success. She didn't care about the cars I'd restored or the money I'd made. She cared about the fact that I showed up for community events, that I helped a neighbor fix their minivan without charging them, that I still talked about Jacob with so much pain and love in my voice. Amanda had a daughter of her own, Mia, from her previous marriage. Her ex-husband had been a lot like Elena, manipulative and controlling. We bonded over our shared experiences, our understanding of what it was like to be painted as the villain in your own child's story. She told me she'd spent years fighting for custody of Mia, years of court battles and accusations and watching her daughter be poisoned against her. The first time Amanda met Jacob, I was nervous. He was 15 by then and more distant than ever. But she handled it with grace and patience. She didn't push. She didn't try to be his friend or his mom. She just showed up and was kind and respectful and never took it personally when he ignored her. Amanda and I got married when Jacob was 17. It was a small ceremony in a park, with close friends and family. Jacob came, but he stood in the back and left early. Amanda's daughter Mia was the flower girl and beamed the entire time. The contrast was painful, but I'd learned to compartmentalize it. I'd learned to accept that my son might never accept me, that I might have to build a new life without him in it. That doesn't mean I ever stopped hoping. The hope died on a Thursday afternoon in October, when I received a letter from Elena's lawyer. Jacob was 17 now, and Elena wanted to terminate my visitation rights. She claimed that Jacob had expressed a desire not to see me anymore, that the visits were causing him distress, that he felt pressured to maintain a relationship he didn't want. I called Jacob immediately. He didn't answer. I left a message asking him to call me back, to tell me himself if that's what he wanted. He never called back. I went to the house where they were living now, the big house Marcus had bought them in the expensive neighborhood. I knocked on the door, and Elena answered with that look of smug superiority she'd perfected over the years. She told me Jacob didn't want to see me, that I should respect his wishes, that if I really loved him, I'd leave him alone. I asked her why she was doing this, why she couldn't just let me have a relationship with my own son. She laughed. She actually laughed in my face and said, "You did this to yourself, Daniel. You chose the garage over him. You chose your new family over him. You can't blame me for the fact that he finally sees you for who you really are." I stood there in the doorway of my son's home, my own ex-wife telling me I was the architect of my own destruction, and I knew there was nothing left to fight for. She had won. She had turned my son against me completely. And nothing I could say or do would ever change that. That night I went home to Amanda and Mia and told them I was done. I told them I couldn't keep fighting a battle I'd already lost. I told them I'd accept the termination of visitation and try to move on. Amanda held me while I cried and told me she understood, that she knew how much it was costing me to let go. I went to court and signed the papers. I gave up my legal right to see my son. I told the judge it was in Jacob's best interest, that I didn't want to force a relationship on a child who clearly didn't want one. The judge looked at me with something that might have been pity and signed off on the order. I was 33 years old and officially a father in name only. The years after that blurred together. I worked. I raised Mia. I tried to be a good stepfather to a girl who'd been through her own share of pain. Amanda and I built a life together, a good life, but there was always a hole in my heart where Jacob was supposed to be. I thought about him every day. I wondered what he was doing, how he was doing, whether he ever thought about me. I sent birthday cards and Christmas gifts, but they were never acknowledged. I couldn't even be sure he was getting them. I didn't try to reach out again. I didn't want to cause him more distress. I just existed in my own separate world, doing my best to move forward. The business continued to grow. I opened my 4th location and became one of the most successful independent auto shops in the state. I hired a CEO to run the day-to-day operations and focused on acquisitions and expansion. The money was good, better than I'd ever imagined, but it meant nothing to me without anyone to share it with. Mia graduated high school and went to college on a full scholarship. Amanda and I drove her to her dorm and cried the entire way back. She was our daughter now, as much as if I'd been her father by blood. She called me dad and hugged me when I was sad and never made me feel like I was an imposter in her life. But I still thought about Jacob. I still wondered if he was okay, if he was happy, if he'd found his path. I still hoped that someday, somehow, he'd find his way back to me. That hope was the only thing keeping me going. Jacob was 22 when he found the emails. I found out about it through a phone call I didn't expect to receive. It was a Monday afternoon, and I was in my office reviewing quarterly reports when my assistant told me there was a young man in the waiting room asking to see me. He said he didn't have an appointment but that it was urgent. When I walked out to the waiting area, I saw him standing by the window, looking out at the street. He was tall and thin, with broad shoulders and dark hair that fell across his forehead. He was wearing a faded hoodie and jeans and looked like he hadn't slept in days. It was Jacob. My son. The boy I'd last seen when he was 17, standing in a courtroom, refusing to look at me. He turned when he heard the door open, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. I could see the conflict in his eyes, the pain, the uncertainty. I could see how much he'd changed in those 5 years, how much he'd grown. He looked so much like his mother, but there was something in his expression that was all mine. Something that looked like hope, mixed with guilt. "Dad," he said. Just that one word. Dad. It was the first time he'd called me that in more than a decade. I don't remember crossing the room. I just remember suddenly being there, pulling him into a hug that he returned with a grip that surprised me. We stood there in the middle of the waiting room, my son and me, holding each other and crying like we'd both been drowning and finally found solid ground. I pulled back and looked at him, at his red-rimmed eyes and the exhaustion etched into his young face. Jacob. What happened? What's wrong? He shook his head and wiped his eyes with the sleeve of his hoodie. I found something. I was going through Mom's old paperwork, helping her clear out her office, and I found a box of emails. She printed them out and hid them. Court emails. From the custody hearing. From the mediation. He swallowed hard and looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time. I read them. All of them. Every single one. I felt my heart drop into my stomach. Jacob. She lied to me. His voice broke on the words. She told me you left us. She told me you didn't want me. She told me you abandoned me for the garage, for your new family. She told me you never fought for me, that you gave up. He was crying openly now, and I couldn't help myself. I started crying too. But you did fight for me, Dad. You fought so hard. You were in court every single time. You had a lawyer, and you were fighting for custody, and she just kept making up lies about you. She kept accusing you of things you never did. And the judge believed her because she had Marcus's lawyers and money and everything. I pulled him back into another hug, holding him while he sobbed against my shoulder. All those years of pain, all those years of silence, they were finally coming out in wave after wave of grief and guilt and relief. I didn't know, he kept saying. I didn't know. I believed everything she told me. I was so angry at you, and you didn't even do anything wrong. You just kept trying, and I kept pushing you away, and I'm so sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry. We sat in my office for the rest of the afternoon, and Jacob told me the whole story. How he'd found the box of emails while Elena was having him help clean out her home office. How he'd thought it was just old tax documents and bills, but something had made him start reading. How he'd found email after email from Elena's lawyer and the court, detailing the accusations she'd made against me, the ones I'd been forced to defend myself against. How he'd found emails from the court granting me visitation, court orders that showed I'd never given up my rights, that I'd only stopped fighting because the court had forced me to. She printed everything, he said, his voice hollow. Everything. The restraining order, the allegations, the custody hearings. She kept it all as trophies. Like she was proud of what she'd done. I sat there listening, feeling my own years of suppressed pain rising to the surface. Why did she print them? I asked. Why would she keep such a detailed record? Jacob shook his head. I think she wanted to have proof. In case I ever found out the truth, she wanted to have her version of events ready. But she never expected me to find the actual court documents. She thought I'd just take her word for it forever. How much did you read? All of it? He looked at me with tears streaming down his face. All the way back to the beginning. The initial custody hearing, the court orders, the visitation schedule, the termination of visitation request. Everything. He paused, and the next words came out in a whisper. I called my lawyer. The one Marcus had hired for me when Mom wanted to terminate visitation. I asked him what really happened, why he'd told me it was better to let the visitation go. And you know what he told me? I shook my head, not trusting myself to speak. He told me that Mom had threatened him. That she would make his life hell if he didn't convince me to cut you out. That she had dirt on him from some business deal Marcus had been involved in. He was scared, so he went along with it. He told me what she wanted me to hear, and I believed him. He laughed, but it was a bitter, hollow laugh. I believed him because I trusted my mother. I trusted her more than I trusted you, because she'd been telling me lies my entire life. We talked for hours after that. Jacob told me about his life, about the years I'd missed. He was in college now, studying engineering. He had a girlfriend, Sarah, who he'd been with for almost a year. He was thinking about proposing, but he wanted me to meet her first. He wanted me to walk with him in the ceremony, even though I hadn't been there for anything else. I told him I'd be honored. That I'd always wanted to be there for him, that I'd always hoped he'd find his way back to me. I told him I'd never stopped loving him, never stopped thinking about him, never given up on the possibility that we might find our way back to each other. He asked me if I had a new family now, and I told him about Amanda and Mia. I showed him pictures of Mia's graduation, of our wedding, of the life I'd built. I told him about the business, about my success, about everything I'd been doing with my time. I want to meet them, he said. I want to meet your wife and your daughter. I want them to know that I'm sorry I wasn't there for you. I want to be part of your life now, if you'll let me. I told him there was nothing in the world I wanted more. The hard part was figuring out what to do about Elena. Jacob said he'd already confronted her before coming to see me. He'd gone home with the box of emails and laid them out on the kitchen table, page after page of evidence of her years of lies and manipulation. He told me she'd tried to deny it at first, to gaslight him into believing the emails were fake or taken out of context. But there was too much. Too many emails, too many dates, too many clear-cut examples of her deception. She'd finally broken down and admitted everything. The affair, the lies to the court, the months of coaching Jacob to hate me, the years of building a narrative that painted me as the villain. She'd told him she did it because she was scared of losing him, because she'd convinced herself that I was a bad influence on him, because she'd bought into her own version of events after so many years of telling it. Jacob told me he hadn't spoken to her since. He'd packed a bag and left the house, moved in with his girlfriend, refused to take any of her phone calls. He told me he didn't know if he would ever forgive her. He told me he didn't know if he could ever trust her again. I found myself in an unexpected position, defending the woman who'd destroyed my relationship with my son. Jacob, I said carefully, what your mother did was wrong. It was cruel and manipulative and calculated. But she's still your mother. She raised you for 22 years. She gave you a home and food and everything you needed to grow up and become the man you are today. I won't tell you to forgive her, because that's your choice. But I will tell you that carrying around all this anger is going to eat you alive. He looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language. How can you defend her after everything she did to you? After everything she took from you? Because I'm not doing it for her, I said. I'm doing it for you. I spent years being angry at your mother. Years. And it didn't help me. It didn't bring you closer to me. It just made me bitter and resentful and cold. I don't want that for you. I want you to move forward with your life, to build something beautiful with Sarah, to be a better man than I was for all those years I was alone. He was quiet for a long time, processing what I'd said. Finally, he nodded. I'm not ready to forgive her. I don't know if I'll ever be ready. But I understand what you're saying. I'll try not to let it consume me. That was enough. That was more than I'd ever expected. The weeks after that were a whirlwind. Jacob met Amanda and Mia, and they all got along beautifully. Amanda treated him like her own son, and Mia immediately adopted him as the older brother she'd never had. We had family dinners and game nights and long conversations about everything we'd missed out on. Jacob told stories about his childhood, and I told stories about mine, and we both discovered that we'd been shaped by the same loss, even though we'd experienced it from opposite sides. Jacob asked if he could come work at the garage over summer break. He said he wanted to learn the family business, to understand what I'd been building all those years I was away from him. I said yes, of course, and watched with pride as he learned to fix cars the way I had, greasy hands and bruised knuckles and the satisfaction of making something work again. He told me he'd been thinking about switching his major, from engineering to business. He said he wanted to take over the garage someday, to build on what I'd started and make it even bigger. He said he wanted to carry on my legacy. I cried when he said that. I'm not ashamed to admit it. The final confrontation with Elena came about 3 months after Jacob found the emails. He told me he wanted to have a family meeting, all three of us together, to lay everything on the table and try to figure out what kind of relationship he wanted with his mother going forward. He asked me if I'd be willing to attend, and I told him I would, for his sake. We met at a neutral location, a small conference room in a hotel near the airport. Elena came in looking tired and worn down, her usual air of superiority nowhere to be found. She'd been through hell in the past few months, with Jacob cutting her off and Marcus leaving her for a younger woman, and it showed in the lines around her eyes and the gray in her hair. She sat down across from Jacob and me, and she looked at me with something I'd never seen in her eyes before, regret. Real, actual, honest regret. I'm sorry, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I know that doesn't fix anything. I know I can't undo the years of damage I caused. But I want you to know that I'm sorry. I was wrong about everything. I was selfish and manipulative and cruel. I took away the most important relationship in Jacob's life because I was jealous and insecure and I couldn't stand the idea of sharing him. I listened to her apology, this woman who'd made my life a living hell for more than a decade, and I felt nothing. No anger, no resentment, no desire to make her pay. Just a deep, bone-weary exhaustion from all the years of carrying that pain. I forgive you, I said, surprising myself with the words. Not because you deserve it. Not because what you did was okay. But because holding on to that anger has been exhausting, and I'm tired of carrying it around. I forgive you so I can let it go, not so you can feel better about yourself. Elena looked at me like she'd been punched in the stomach. I think she'd expected me to yell, to scream, to demand retribution. My calm forgiveness was somehow more devastating than any anger could have been. Jacob took my hand under the table and squeezed it. We were a team now, my son and me. We'd been given a second chance, and neither of us was going to waste it. The aftermath of that conversation was complicated. Jacob still has a relationship with his mother, though it's strained and distant. He sees her on holidays and birthdays, but the warmth is gone. He's still working through his anger, still trying to make sense of the years of manipulation. He's in therapy now, and he says it's helping. But he's also rebuilding his relationship with me, which is the only thing that matters. He calls me every day. He comes to dinner at least once a week. He's learning the business and planning for the future. He's making me proud in ways I never thought possible. Amanda and I have officially adopted Jacob as our son, even though he's an adult now. He's part of our family, as much as Mia ever was. The four of us spend holidays together, take vacations together, share our lives together. It's everything I ever wanted, everything I thought I'd lost forever. I still think about those years of silence, those years of being absent from my son's life. I think about all the birthdays I missed, all the school plays and soccer games and parent-teacher conferences. I think about the man he became without me, the struggles he faced, the pain he carried. I think about how close we came to never finding our way back to each other. But I also think about the emails. The court documents his mother hid for all those years. The truth that finally found its way to him, that broke through years of lies and manipulation and gave us a second chance. I think about the power of the truth, and I realize that no matter how dark things get, the truth will always find a way to the surface. Here's what I've learned in the years since Jacob found those emails. I learned that being a father is more than just being present. It's about being consistent, about showing up even when it's hard, even when you're not wanted, even when everything tells you it's pointless. It's about loving your child unconditionally, even when they push you away, even when they hurt you, even when they forget you exist. I learned that forgiveness is not about the other person. It's about freeing yourself from the weight of the past, about releasing the pain so you can move forward. I forgave Elena not because she deserved it, but because I deserved peace. I learned that family is not always about blood. It's about the people who show up for you, who love you through the hard times, who stand by you when everything else falls apart. Amanda and Mia are my family as much as Jacob ever was, and I'm grateful for every single one of them. And I learned that the truth has a way of working itself out. It might take years. It might seem like the lies have won. But eventually, the truth comes out, and when it does, it changes everything. Jacob is 23 now. He's finishing his degree and working at the garage part-time. He proposed to Sarah last month, and she said yes. He asked me to be his best man, and I cried when he asked. I'm going to stand beside my son at his wedding and watch him start a new chapter of his life. We still have hard conversations sometimes. We still talk about the years we lost, the pain we both carried, the guilt we both feel. But we talk about it openly and honestly, without shame or blame. We're both in therapy, and we're both healing. Elena is still in our lives, though it's complicated. She's trying to rebuild her relationship with Jacob, but it's slow going. He's still processing his anger, still working through all the years of manipulation. She's in therapy too, trying to understand why she did what she did, trying to become a better person. I don't hate her anymore. I can't afford to. Hatred takes too much energy, and I have better things to focus on. I have a son to build a relationship with, a wife to love, a daughter to support. I have a business to run and a legacy to build. I have a life that I thought I'd lost forever, and I'm not going to waste a single moment of it. If you're reading this and you've been through something similar, I want you to know, there is hope. It might not seem like it. It might feel like you've lost everything, like there's no way back, like the lies have won. But the truth will always find its way to the surface. It might take years, decades even. But eventually, the truth comes out, and when it does, it changes everything. Don't give up on the people you love. Keep showing up, even when it's hard. Keep loving, even when you're not loved in return. Keep believing that the truth will win, because it will. It always does. And when the truth finally does come out, be ready to forgive. Not because they deserve it, but because you deserve peace. Because holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. Because the only way to truly move forward is to let go of the past. I have my son back. I have my family back. I have my life back. And I wouldn't trade any of it for the world. The last time I saw Elena, she asked me if I thought she could ever earn back Jacob's trust. I looked at her, this woman who'd taken so much from me, who'd cost me years of my son's life, and I told her the truth. That's between you and him, I said. I can't help you rebuild a bridge you burned down yourself. But I can tell you this, if you're sincere about trying, if you're willing to be honest and transparent and patient, there might be a way forward. But it's going to take time. Years, maybe. And you're going to have to earn every single step. She nodded, her eyes filled with tears. She looked older than she was, worn down by the weight of her own choices. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. I'm going to try, she said. I know it's not enough. I know I can't undo what I did. But I'm going to try. Good, I said. That's all any of us can do. And I walked away, leaving her standing in the parking lot with her regrets. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even bitter. I was just ready to move on. I had a family to go home to. A son who loved me. A wife who supported me. A daughter who made me proud. A future that was bright and full of possibility. And I was going to make the most of every single moment of it. That's my story. It's not a fairy tale. It's not a perfect happy ending with everything neatly resolved. It's messy and complicated and real. But it's my story, and I'm proud of it. I'm proud of the man I became, the father I am, the life I built. I'm proud of my son for finding the truth and having the courage to face it. I'm proud of my wife for loving me through the darkest days. I'm proud of my daughter for accepting me as her father even though I didn't have to be. And I'm proud of myself for never giving up, for never stopping believing that the truth would win in the end. Because it did. It always does.